What the heydays of the Permian had been way behind us, the 40s and 50s, and even in the 60s. The Permian was the place to be.
Welcome to the Business Growth Masterclass, where business growth is made simple. I'm your host, Albert Gillespie.
And I'm your co-host, Kellen Ketchersid. Join us as we bring you stories from business leaders so you can learn from their wins, their losses, and everything in between.
Today's guest is the former CEO of Henry Resources based out of Midland, Texas, and the former chairman of the board of Lubbock Christian University. Without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Mr. Terry Creech.
Hey guys, it's good to be here this morning with you.
I am excited to have you. I've wanted to twist your arm and get you here for a while now, and wanted to start off with something that's really impactful for our region, and I think impactful for our nation. But you at Henry Resources and some other ventures were part of the group that brought fracking to the Permian Basin. Tell us that story. How did you get in that room? How did you guys bring fracking to the Permian?
Well, as I think I should say, as the CPA in the room, that the engineers and geologists really did most of the technical side of bringing the fracking process here, but us accountants like to tag along for the ride whenever possible. And so, but it was in the early 2000s, and we had a engineer approach the company related to a process of using slick water fracking, which is basically putting chemicals in to reduce the friction when you pump high pressure water down, and to add the Wolfcamp zone to the Sprayberry zone to come up with what they call the Wolfberry play, with slick water fracking being used to fracture that rock. Think of like a rock hitting your windshield and splintering it. It's what you're trying to do to the rock. The Wolfcamp was always too hard.
And what's the Wolfcamp? Just real quick.
It's a zone down under the ground.
Oh, like a rock layer.
Like a rock layer.
Okay.
And it sits right below the Sprayberry Formation down in the Permian, and so that process was brought as something that had potential, but had not been completely thought through to the company. At that time, I wasn't actually part of Henry. I had my own CPA firm and was doing my own thing, was pretty happy doing my own thing. I didn't like reporting to anyone else, but as a CPA, I was constantly over there advising and consulting and helping the organization. And as it continued to grow, eventually I was brought into the organization and to help with all the myriad things you have to do related to finances. But that was brought, it was tested out. It had some mixed success until the geologist really identified which part of the zone of these rock strata would be the most would be best for fracking. Some of them just didn't have the rock porosity you'd need to be able to frack them at all, and some did. And so that was brought in, and the rock started fracturing well. The oil started flowing, and from that, we were able to successfully lease several 100,000 acres of land before really the rest of the world caught on to what was going on. And Mr. Henry was just way ahead of the curve on that. Kudos to him for being so visionary.
Yeah. So context for the listener, fracking, when we're talking about that, I think back to the shale revolution of the early 2000s. And so, North Texas, parts of Oklahoma, this became a practice that allowed us to extract a lot of natural gas from shale formations that previously weren't really feasible. It was really difficult, really expensive to get to it, and they tweaked. Fracking has been around for 100 years, but really tweaked the process using really smart engineers and geologists to figure out when and where to do it, and then bringing that to the Permian and applying that to oil and gas, traditional oil, really changed the U.S. and made us more oil independent, and really revolutionized that industry. And so maybe, but to not belabor the point, how does that company build that culture where they're willing to try something? Because I'm sure that's not cheap.
Well, it's not cheap, and it's become over the years more and more expensive as we've added horizontal drilling and not just vertical drilling to the process, as we tweak the techniques on how to do that. But it all started really back as you were talking about. George Mitchell was the one that sort of pioneered this in the Barnett Shale, and it was being used successfully over there, but it had not been brought out to the Permian yet. Uh, and so bringing it out to the Permian is what revolutionized that. But part of it is you get into business, and everybody thought the Permian was dead. What the heydays of the Permian had been way behind us, the 40s and 50s, and even into the 60s. The Permian was the place to be in the oil and gas business, but that continued to wane. The amount of oil being produced continued to decline every year. A lot of books have been written about this, saying about the demise of the Permian. The Permian was going away. The big companies were moving out of the Permian. It was sort of like, okay, there's some leftovers down there, but there's just not that much left to get out of the Permian. We need to go to the Gulf of Mexico, or we need to go to Africa or South America, or fill in the blank, anything but the Permian, because the Permian's already been produced as far as what is easily been able to extract, and there's no way to get to that other oil that's down there. And the slickwater fracking technique allowed the Permian to be revitalized because it was able to get to the oil that was there that had never been able to be produced before. Some of that is, if you're on a decline curve and nobody's leaving, you're sometimes willing to, hey, let's take a little more risk here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because otherwise this basin is just going to continue to deplete out, and the oil industry out here is going to go away. And so people were looking for ways to revitalize that, to get to that oil that we knew was there that could not be extracted. And this has just happened to be the technique that got there. And kudos to Mr. Henry and Mr. Johnson, who were running the company at that time, for seeing that and being willing to take the risk to do that, because they weren't typically the people that would just go out there and be real aggressive, but they were willing to take that risk, and they did a fantastic job at taking advantage of it once they found a new technique.
I would imagine if you weren't one of the companies that was willing to take a little risk that others weren't taking, and you weren't a first mover in this space, that you'd miss a lot of the opportunity that ended up being there. So, for our listeners, just thinking about, maybe you're not in the oil and gas space, but maybe your business is feeling like it's in a downward slope, or hasn't been where it used to be in its glory days. I think there's a lesson here for the listener in that, exploring new technologies and being willing to take risks. I know everybody's talking about AI today, but I think a lot of business owners don't even know really what that means in their business. Like, what is a practical application for this new technology? So as a business owner or entrepreneur, thinking in ways that maybe others won't, and being willing to take the risks of implementing, not just talking about, ideas, but actually taking action and trying things that other people won't. That's a cool, takeaway that I already have from your story. What would you say as far as a Henry? You know, you moved in and you were a CPA to start with, ended up as the CEO. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about how that evolution took place.
Well, we had the opportunities were large in the early days, and so we had a lot of people go out and leave and start their own companies, and that creates some vacancies in management, and so that created a need to have other people come in that had expertise and that could help guide and lead the company as these vacancies were created by people going out and starting their own companies, because everybody realized, man, there's unlimited opportunities all over the place. And so as that happened, I was offered that opportunity to come in, and I sort of worked through the whole process as far as just being whatever they needed me to be, negotiating deals or uh, helping with the financial and capital needs that the company had. And
Were you pulled in for those deal negotiations because of your financial acumen? And was that where it started? Because usually I don't think of the accountant as being the guy you bring in to negotiate, but you're in a unique position, it sounds like.
well, I guess so. I mean, you'd have to ask them as far as what they saw that had potential in me, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think part of it being able to be flexible, to be what I needed to be, and not. I don't know that I was ever the best accountant in the world, because I really didn't ever like, even as in the CPA world, being the guy that accounted for the historical numbers. What I like to think of is how can I shape the future numbers? And the historical numbers just gave me the information I needed to shape the future numbers. And a lot of accountants, they just like to be very accurate and precise on getting the historical numbers in place.
Yeah.
And that's vitally important. Without good information, you can't make good decisions on a consistent basis. But for me, I wanted to start from
Forward
those
thinking.
numbers and go forward.
Yeah.
And so historically, I'd always been on that end of the accounting world, which isn't a large part of the accounting world, but it was the part that I actually enjoyed being in and could function in and do well in. And so I had a staff to take care of the historical numbers when I was at the CPA practice. In fact, I couldn't even do my own tax return. I had to get somebody to do my own tax return for me, because I didn't really work and I didn't know how to use the software. I was in the future thinking, how can you shape this to make more money? How can you shape this to build your company? And so most of the clients that I served, they had an appreciation for the fact that I brought that kind of thinking as opposed to the historical thinking in to the process. And so I think that's maybe why Mr. Henry approached me about coming over when he did, and why I was brought in to help with negotiations and things like that. When we, particularly when we started on the sales process of selling.
Very cool.
I love this so much. I love the talking about taking calculated risks.
Yeah.
I think of the book Only the Paranoid Survive. I just finished it a couple months ago, but basically it's a former CEO of Intel who is telling the story of Intel almost going under in the 80s. They made these memory chips, and that kind of became commoditized, and China started making these chips and really just cut the legs out from underneath them, basically making it for 20% of what they were selling it. And they had to pivot. They had to take calculated risks.
Yeah.
And they really had a method to the madness where they're always looking at the horizon. What is the market doing right now? What are our competitors doing right now? What does the future look like? And rather than looking at a crystal ball, they take calculated risks.
Yeah.
They start small and try new things. They're always iterating, always being curious, always, you still have your base, your foundation of your business that makes your money, that is profitable, that's the thing you do. But being intentional and trying the next thing on the leading edge is really, the theme of the book is being paranoid, thinking about what could be in the future and trying to plan for it in a systematic way. And I love that. And I love that already in this story.
Yeah.
But the unique part here is we've already touched on this a little bit. He was a CPA that somehow found himself as a CEO of an oil and gas business. And so a couple of things there I think are for our business owners, knowing your financials, knowing the story that it's telling is a powerful skill set and just a necessary skill set. And we've touched on this in the last few episodes that is something that you need to devote some time to understand what are your financials, what's the story they're telling, and what does that mean for the day-to-day operations? What does that mean for the future of the business? And how can you use that to inform, to make those calculated risks?
Yeah. And you got to play to your strengths, because understanding that I'm the guy who thinks into the future, and I'm not necessarily the one who's going to quibble over the historical details too much, but knowing that they're important. So you need somebody to do that. Just knowing where people belong in your organization. We see this a lot with businesses that have been multi-generational, or there's been a succession where it happens often. You've got somebody who's an innovator, a forward thinker, tries new things in the beginning of the organization. And then when the handoff occurs, it's often to somebody who's more of a caretaker, who wants to keep things the way they've always been. And that inevitably leads to, or at least usually leads to, a long-term decline in a business because they're not trying new things. But I love that you were brought in. Mr. Henry had some foresight to see this guy. He thinks beyond just this moment. And I'm assuming, it sounds like his leadership style was that way, to see around the curve. Obviously he did that with fracking. So just tell us a little bit more about, so now you're in these rooms and you're part of some of these strategic meetings and negotiations. So what moved you into, eventually into the CEO role?
Well, some of that process is just the natural evolution and transition of a business. We, because as Albert, I think, pointed out earlier, it's a very capital intensive business once you get into fracking. And the more capital you need, the more that you have to be thinking about how capital allocation and capital structures and how to raise capital, what you can keep, what you can sell, how to strategically use your dollars to maximize where you want to go. And I think that was helpful. It also, we had started a process of selling some of the assets that we had. And with that process, how do I want to say this? It allowed more, with all those investment dollars, not all of it was going back into oil and gas. And so you needed someone that could both look at the oil and gas and help them understand how much capital allocation to have, but also how to allocate dollars to other types of investments that maybe weren't as risky, and so that you could balance that need with what the ownership needed and what the company needed. And so capital allocation became a bigger and bigger part of the business, and that led to me eventually becoming CEO.
So what were some of the lower risk or different, diversification you did as far as like acquiring new assets beyond just the oil and gas interests?
It was a layered approach. I mean, obviously we put a lot of capital just into low risk investments that just were interest bearing. But a lot of this was happening at the time when interest rates were extremely low. So it was really hard to get the types of returns that you wanted there. Mm-hmm. So we would look for investments as people that has historically made money with real property investments. We tended to migrate to real property investments. So the real estate business was in 09, 010, or 11 had a lot of low hanging fruit during that time because of the financial crisis that happened in 08. And so we probably used most of the cash that wasn't just parked in low income returns from interest into real estate.
Cool.
And that turned out to be a fortuitous move.
I have some questions. I'd love to take a step back and start with your CPA career a little more, and maybe you could tell a story there, because the oil and gas industry, at least from a lot of perspective, outside of Midland, Odessa, it's a really difficult niche to get into. It's kind of a guarded niche where getting your foot in the door is difficult
and capital intensive, so hard to even break in.
Right. There's so much to that. So maybe take a step back and talk about, the start of your CPA career and the building of that business, and then what were the events that kind of led to you getting your foot in the door in the oil and gas business?
Well, started out, it's 1981. I'm graduating from Lubbock Christian College at the time, and Dr. Krista Dobbs, who was head of the business department there, I said, where should I go look for a job? And she said, go to Midland. They're paying well down there. And I was a poor, broke college kid, and I thought paying well piqued my interest. So
sounds pretty good.
Yeah. So I actually looked on a map to see where Midland was, because I didn't know. I'd heard it was somewhere south of here, but that's about all I knew. I'd never been there. And back then, most of the major accounting firms had offices there, which was unusual for a town of 60, 70,000 people. And so I applied to the big accounting firms, and I ended up hiring on with a firm down there called KMG Main Herdman, which is now part of the KPMG organization, and through mergers over the last 40 something years. But at that time, it was the fifth largest accounting firm in the world on a standalone basis. And we packed up and a U-Haul, and Sheree and I moved to Midland, Texas. And so we went down there, and I started working for them. They had 100 people in their office in Midland, another 40 or 50 in their office in Odessa. And so it was a large organization, and we were really, really busy. They said, by the way, our business office hours are 7:30 to 7 Monday through Friday and 8 to 5 Saturday, but everybody works more than that. And they were right. Because the oil patch was booming in 1981. For the first time in forever, we had an oil boom going on again in the Permian, because the price of oil had become so high. And it had exceeded $40 a barrel, and everybody thought it was going to $100 a barrel, which $40 a barrel back then would be like probably $100 and something a barrel now.
Yeah.
And so it was crazy times. And we moved down there, and Sheree got a great job. I was working there, and as I like to tell people, by 1983, the oil bust hit, and I would have left, but I was too broke to rent a U-Haul and leave. And so we stayed on, and we worked through that. The FDIC became the largest employer in Midland, Texas, and there was a lot of bankruptcy work, a lot of continued momentum for those that wanted to stay, but it wasn't overly profitable. And we're like, oh, it's a bust cycle, but it'll come back. What we didn't know is this bust cycle was going to last from 1983, 1984 until the early 2000s.
Yeah, so 20 years almost.
Yes, almost 20 years of down cycle, and it stayed down. The price of oil would creep up a little bit, but in 1999 it dropped back below $10 a barrel again. And that wiped out a lot of the old hardcore guys that even had stayed and thought they would just ride it out. But that was a death knell to many of the hardened old timers. And so, but through that, you learned a lot. Those hard times make you be creative on how to survive. It makes you figure out how to stay, as we used to like to say in the old days, how to stay in the phone book. Nice. It says, I don't know if we'll get rich, but let's figure out how to stay in the phone book, because that meant your business was going to continue on for another year. Yeah. Because you still had a phone number. Way back before cell phones and everything being automated. And so through all of those hard times and those hard knocks, it sort of forces you to figure out how to be innovative, whether you're engineer geologist looking for better ways to frack rocks, or whether you're a CPA trying to figure out how to make enough money to survive and pay all your professional employees that are working for you. Because then from 1981 through 1989, I worked for the large international accounting firms. I worked for KMG Main Herdman, and then I worked for what was Coopers and Lybrand. It would be PricewaterhouseCoopers now, another merger. And but then in 1990, me and a couple of other CPAs left the large accounting firm environment, and we formed a local accounting firm because we wanted to stay in Midland. Midland's one of those places that when you first move there, you're looking for any way you can to leave. But after you've been there just a little bit of time, you figure out this is really a cool place to raise a family and to live and to make a living. And so we formed our own firm, and we specialized in deal structuring and negotiation, and we specialized in tax planning, and that led us to having a lot of clientele that wanted the expertise that we offered.
Let me jump in real quick. This is a great transition right here. I love what he said about the hard times, the down times, how that makes you creative.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our listeners can relate right now in our current environment, current economic environment, that it's a down cycle for a lot of different industries.
Yeah.
And that can feel heavy. That can feel, when you're putting in the, 50, 60, 80 hours a week and you feel like you're not making any progress, keeping your name in the phone book, or I guess today the Google directory that says you're open, keeping your name, keeping your business open, and getting scrappy now, being tenacious, looking at every item. And this is why knowing your financials is so important. Being able to look at every line item down your profit and loss statement and your balance sheet and understand the who, what, and why between each of those, and asking questions, pulling on the thread of like, okay, how can we do that better? How can we do that more efficient? How can we tweak this offering so that it's more profitable? How can we be what the market is asking for? And I think if you feel that you're in that place right now, take comfort in the fact that fighting every day, being creative, being tenacious, finding the next right move to make eventually leads to special places where you can realize the vision of your business and the impact that you set out to have on the world. And I just want to encourage our listeners to keep fighting. Obviously hold your business with an open hand. It keeps you pretty humble. It keeps you praying, and, God provides, but you got to show up with your work boots and keep showing up.
Yeah. And if you take the lessons that you learn in those more difficult times, which it's clear that you did, because I would imagine that part of the emphasis on diversifying later was a lesson learned from those days, when you saw these guys that were in the oil and gas space and weren't diversified enough, and you go through a 20-year down cycle, and lo and behold, it's hard to hang on if you've got some other assets and you've got some, things that you learned from those previous times. I would imagine that was a big part of your thinking later on. But yeah, hanging in there and just bringing excellence to every day. That's something we talk about a lot with our consultant clients at Stack Business Coaching is, knowing your financials like Albert did, and then using those to just strive for excellence, even in the difficult times. But yeah, as far as, so now we've kind of heard the story from origins and all the way from not knowing where Midland was all the way through to the early, 2010, I guess, around that point in time. So can you just tell us a little bit more about kind of the story moving forward with leading at Henry?
Well, I want to stay on that point now where you're talking about deal structuring.
Okay.
And I want to translate that a little bit for the listeners. So whenever we were talking about oil and gas, there's a lot of putting together investments, putting together deals, which is, a drill program, a business plan or whatever. And having a CPA that can come in and teach you how to structure that legally in a way that makes the most financial sense, gets the biggest return on investment. I think that's an interesting point here for Terry that kind of starts to translate to, okay, let's give him more opportunity in this oil and gas space, because he in these hard times, he's developed this unique approach, this creative approach that really adds more value to that business. And so continue that from the early 90s. Now you guys started your own.
Well, I think one of the things, and this is for maybe people that are in those businesses that they feel like they're just pedaling and going nowhere. The 90s sort of felt like we're pedaling and going nowhere as far as the CPA practice goes. And so we did a couple of different things. One, we started trying to put deals together and participate in those deals and help people manage the deals that we put together. And so that gave us a little bit more income. The first several didn't work well, but we just kept plugging. And eventually they started working better because we got better at what we were doing. We learned from those structures. The second thing was on the CPA practice, because there were fewer and fewer businesses that could actually pay you to do traditional CPA work. We started expanding and looking and getting other certifications and other expertise. And so, I spent a bunch of time getting a certified valuation analyst certification so I could value businesses if they were going to be bought or sold or for estate planning or whatever that might be that they needed a valuation for. Well, think forward to Henry now. I never made a ton of money on that as a CPA because there wasn't that many things going on in the 90s in Midland. But the work that I did do and the expertise I did acquire, you get 10 years later, and it's right what you need.
That's cool.
At that time, you can look back and say, oh, maybe that's why the Lord had me doing that in the 90s.
Yeah.
Okay. As opposed to in the 90s thinking, man, I spent a lot of work on this. I sure hope it pays off someday, And well, it did, but not in the way any of us could see. And all those deals we were doing, small deals though they were at the CPA practice, some of them turned out to be very successful, but nothing like what was going on in the oil patch in the 2000s. But still, doing that allowed us to see those structures and to think, because a lot of times there's a lot of commonality between those small deals we were doing and those big deals as far as how to structure contracts, how to work with the attorneys to be sure we're getting the yeses we need and not just getting told no. Because a lot of times people are really good at telling you no, but they're not really good at telling you how to get to yes. And so being able to work through that and figure out how to get to the yeses.
Nice.
On those led to all of a sudden when you're in a lot bigger deals a decade later, you're prepared for that.
Can you say a little bit more about your strategy, how to get somebody to tell you how to get to yes? Like, do you have an example, or can you think of a time where you had to do that with a deal?
Well, there's two places you're trying to get to yes at, and one is with your attorney. And a lot of times your attorneys want to come in and say, you can't do that. That's not going to work. And they're right.
Yeah.
It's not. And you need to know that. That's very important. But what you need them to also be able to bring to the table is but you could do this.
Yeah.
Or that's probably not the best, but there's not much risk there.
Something we say in my family is, you're thinking in problems, I need you to think in solutions.
Yes.
And it's the kind of the same concept.
Yes. And then the other way, obviously, is the other side of the negotiating table. You got to figure out how to get them to yes. And a lot of that, you have to understand where they're coming from and what is driving their resistance. Sometimes it's just a money deal, but a lot of times there's other things going on the other side of the table. And if you can spend the time and just have a feel for, they're saying no, but it's not why you think they're saying no, and just have an honest conversation with them, not an adversarial one, but just an honest one about what can we do to get to yes. Because if they really want the deal and you really want the deal, normally you can get there. Now, if you become adversarial, then one of my sayings that I learned years ago was the madder you get, the dumber you get. So if I get mad, I get dumb. And if I make them mad, they get dumb. And it's really hard to make a good deal when two dumb people are negotiating against each other.
That's a great lesson in any business. And I love the relational part of all that, because just getting to where somebody's real motives are isn't always easy. People don't always just tell you, well, I don't want to do this because, I'm afraid of, whatever is coming around the bend. But if you get to know each other and you go to lunch several times and you're just having those conversations day to day. I love that not ever going to a place of anger, even though those things can be frustrating when it's not all just working out right away like you'd like to see.
Right.
But, so as you've gone through these kinds of processes, what's something for our listeners that you think maybe they don't think about often when it comes to being a forward thinker in your business? What are some other keys that you think people should consider?
Well, one of the things that to me was always a really big deal. One of my favorite business books is Good to Great. And I love the example in Good to Great of Walgreens. And in that book, they talk about how they changed their business strategy and they reworked it based on financial principles. But those financial principles were based around switching which numbers they were looking at. They were looking at, they would space their stores way far apart and they wanted to get the highest return per item. And they realized, what about if we just stacked them together? And as you can see, Walgreens are on every other corner now. And let's start selling like a convenience store with a pharmacy in the back. And let's run a whole bunch of volume and we can reduce our margins. And they became one of the most successful companies on the New York Stock Exchange for like over 2 decades because they changed which numbers they were looking at. And I think that's a lesson for any business. It's good to have historical numbers and it's good to look at those numbers. But think about which one is the right number to look at.
Yeah.
Because, anymore, a computer can spit you out and you can get 30 different ratios. And I even look at some of those and I get cross-eyed looking at how many ratios are there and how they just supposed to interrelate to each other. And I still tell people that come and ask me about it, I said, you need to find the 2 or 3 numbers that make the difference for your company. I said, normally it's not 30 ratios that make the difference for your company. It's just 2 or 3 that's going to drive you to success. Find out what those 2 or 3 are, and then focus on getting those to be the very best that they can be in your business.
Oh man, I love that. There's so much there. And when you think about, asking the right questions, which numbers should we be concentrating on and where are those numbers going to lead us if they're the ones we're focused on? Because as you said, Walgreens had some numbers they were thinking about at first, but they realized they're asking the wrong questions.
Right.
And as a business owner, having that strategic mindset of not just in this moment, all right, did we check all the boxes today and look at all the figures, but are we zooming out? Are we taking the time in our leadership meetings to really think big picture and think about where we want things to go? Where are the market opportunities? And are we just doing the same thing because that's what we've always done? Or are we willing to be flexible and move to where the market is shifting? Maybe we need to change what we look at day to day on those sheets, the printouts or whatever, the dashboard that we use. So
I love the intention of, it's 2 to 3 numbers. When we talk about in with our coaching clients, it's developing that KPI dashboard, that key performance indicator dashboard that they're looking at, that they really have a thumb on the pulse of their business and understand that. And that's where we try to get them to is you don't need 18 different metrics you're looking at.
Yeah.
But
it creates more confusion.
Yeah. What are the most important? If you're a barbecue stand, it's all right. Your beef price, your margin for your beef,
your prime cost, your food, your labor.
Yeah. If you're a piece of real estate, if you're an apartment complex, it's percent occupancy, percent collections, And then we really need to look at our turnover costs. And if we can control those three, the business is going to be really profitable.
And yeah. And as a business owner, you then want everybody who's not in leadership, you want to see that every person in the organization, what they're doing is driving those numbers,
Mhm.
you know, because if what they're doing at the ground level is disconnected from what you want to see driving the business, then, you know, we're all just in silos doing our own thing.
All right. So now we're in the 2010s at Henry. What's next?
Well, at that point, you sort of have to look at it and say, where are we going from here? And 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 of course, we always wanted to be in the oil and gas business, and uh, uh, and so we kept an oil and gas component. We have a diversification component, and really, uh, at that point, we moved forward and we're started as blocking and tackling for a while, and and then we lost some more management because they got offered a whole bunch of money to go out and start their own company, and they did. And kudos, all of them great guys. New group comes in, and the fracking has evolved substantially. The horizontal drilling has become a big deal, and so the new oil and gas team started doing horizontal drilling, and it's a learning curve. It took a second, but we had a really good group of engineers and a really good engineer driving the drilling part of the company, and we started getting good at adding horizontal drilling. It was a slow process because all of a sudden the capital nature of the business goes up 3 or 4 fold per well when you go from vertical drilling to horizontal drilling. And but we made that transition, and we started drilling horizontal wells, picking up acreage in that area, and started drilling horizontal wells like a lot of the other people were. I think one of the things, it's a Henry deal, but it's bigger than Henry, is for people to realize is this started in like 2000, 2001, 2002. And now we're a decade or more later. And when you have a paradigm shift like slickwater fracking was for the Permian, just because you missed the first 2 or 3 years doesn't mean you've missed the play. In fact, the people that have arguably maybe made the most money are the ones that came in later and added things like horizontal drilling and added things like improving all the fracking techniques and brought in the things that would support that, like water systems and sand companies and all the other service infrastructure that's required to do these massive projects, and innovated the drilling rigs to where the drilling rigs can walk from location to location and do all these things. And so you could look and say, gosh, I missed that. And actually, no, 3, 5, even 10 years in, you haven't missed it. When those shifts change, there's time. You just got to figure out whereabouts in that cycle you can find your own ramp to what is happening. And so a lot of people continue to come, a lot of people continue to prosper because that on ramp, they found the right on ramp and they did well.
That's such a great lesson. I think that applies across the board in so many ways. And we can have this mindset of like, oh, I remember when the first time Bitcoin had like a big boom. Not that I'm advocating for Bitcoin here, but I remember after the boom and then the crash, a friend of mine at work was like, I was going to buy some Bitcoin, but now I've missed it. And like, here we are. That was probably 10 years ago. And it's more than 10x what it was when he said that on that day. But there's just so many opportunities in the business world that keep coming our way. That's what I meant by striving for excellence, because you never know when that next door is going to open, like you were just saying, and you've lived that. So that's encouraging, I think, for our listeners who hear this and they maybe know it as theory, but haven't had the experience of it yet. Just keep getting your reps and keep looking for ways that you can enter the market with value.
Yeah, and I it continues the point that we were discussing earlier. When times are lean, what you do to stay alive is you really get to know your numbers, and you do the really boring but important things of how do I get just 1% better?
Yeah.
And that's the great game of business is you don't have to be this tech company that's trying to go from 0 to 1 and create this multi-billion dollar thing. It's this established technology. You find your niche, your on ramp into that industry, and then you just do the boring things of getting a little bit better each day. And you look up a decade from now and you're excellent.
Yeah.
You're excellent. Okay. Keep going down the line. So we've moved to horizontal drilling, which is wildly more expensive, and maybe the public doesn't think of that enough. But imagine being thousands of feet below the surface and then saying, all right, we're going to make a right-hand turn down here. And all the equipment and the engineering and the innovation that had to occur to basically find a formation thousands of feet under the ground, and then turn a corner and travel right down Main Street in the middle of that formation and access more and more of the formation of the oil and gas. And so that's where we're at this point in your story. Keep going.
Well, that's where we're at. Once again, probably talking to the drilling folks is a whole lot better than talking to the accountant in this, because one of the things that you have to realize when you're running a business, particularly with as many diversified technical things as Henry is, you have to rely on people that know a whole lot more than you do.
Yeah.
In almost every single part of the organization. And so, while I was CEO of the whole organization, we had a president of the oil company that was an engineer, and reporting to him was a lot of brilliant engineers and geologists and landmen. But we venture into the horizontal drilling, but it does become very sophisticated. I remember talking to the head of our drilling group, really sharp younger engineer, and one day, and he said, I like being in drilling because you're out in the oil patch, and you think it's a really manly man type of job being out there on those drilling rigs. Of course, we all see all the TV shows and everything, right? And he said, the other day I walked into the trailer out at the drilling rig, and he said there's a bunch of guys out there on joysticks driving the drilling program down 10,000 feet down, and it says we've just become a bunch of guys with joysticks,
a bunch of gamers,
driving, just gaming out here, and while that's an oversimplification, it has, just like the rest of the world, the technology has evolved drastically,
right,
through that, and you have to figure out how to keep up with that, and that's what we were in the process of doing. And really, that sort of leads to where a lot of my story from Henry starts to wind down, because with that transition, at this point, I'm just about at the end of all the old management that was at Henry, and the new guys are there, and it's time for them to do their stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I had put out probably most of my juice between the CPA firm and Henry getting to where we were. And I was sort of ready to not find my own ramp, but find my exit ramp and turn it over to them and let them continue figuring out how to properly exploit the horizontal drilling opportunities, and even move, if they chose to, over to the Delaware Basin. I was much more of a Midland Basin kind of guy, which the Delaware's over by Pecos and a little bit further away, a little bit deeper, a little bit harder. But they were younger and thinking like that, and so and that's a good thing. And so, I think if there's anything left in my last 2 or 3 years at the organization that I would say is, you need to know when it's time to transition. And I had gotten to the point that it was time for me to transition and go do my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
It probably one of the hardest things for me to do was to work for myself for almost 20 years and then go work for somebody else.
I would imagine. Yeah.
Because no matter how incredible of a person they are, and Mr. Henry was an incredible man, legend in the business, visionary, gave a tremendous amount of encouragement and latitude on what you did to make things work. But at the same time, it's still not working for yourself.
Right.
And I never really, I think, completely made that transition as well as I needed to. Because once you work for yourself, you might not be making as much money, but it just feels better.
Yeah. There's some freedom in it, right?
Yes. And so it sort of takes from horizontal drilling to, okay, if there's something in business to know is knowing when to move on. And for me, is looking, I was really had this burning desire to do a lot more philanthropic work. And some of the things that I was really had passionate about doing, my wife was heavily involved in, as well as the whole family, but she was sort of the leader of that in a work over in Kenya with Kenya Widows and Orphans. I was heavily involved in the Lubbock Christian board, but there was some encouragement for me to step up and become the chair there, which is a lot more time intensive.
Yeah.
Type of pursuit. And so it was time for me to transition. I think the Lord was telling me it was time for me to transition. And so, so that's what happened is I transitioned from that to having my own little family office to manage my own investments and also mentor and consult with a lot of younger guys that were in the business world and then do philanthropic work. And so that's really what happened with me at that point in time.
Well, that's a great lesson for people out there. And thank you for the heart of giving back and setting an example in that way, because I think a lot of people who have been successful in business and are nearing that, transition into retirement or the next phase of life are not always thinking in that way. So I think that's a good example. And what was the name of the ministry that your wife supports in Kenya that you mentioned?
It's called KWO, KWO,
Okay.
which stands for Kenya Widows and Orphans.
Okay.
And it was originally a work of the Golf Course Road Church down in Midland.
Right,
And then it became its own nonprofit organization. And she has been on the board of that for, I guess, ever since it became its own separate 501c3, but I think she's been to Kenya like 35 times over the last 15 years. So, I've been over there, I think 7 or 8 times maybe, but I can't quite get myself to go as often as she does.
Yeah.
But they have over 2,500 children in their care, either in orphanages or in at feeding stations that they provide education and clothing and food and shelter and along with the oversight churches that are in Kenya to help with that.
That's
So
great.
it's a pretty cool thing. You guys need to come over with us sometime.
Sounds like it. I would love that.
I would love that. I think there's a lesson here in that transition and is there. There was a lot of self-reflection and a lot of discernment of when is enough.
Yeah.
What I think business owners, we can lose sight of that. Especially in the hard times. Prior to the hard times, you have these grand visions of what the business is going to look like and the impact that you're going to have, and then you have the hard times. And then the vision is just, man, I just want to put food on the table. I just want to provide for my family. I just want to survive. And then you look up and things start to get better. Things start to turn and the business starts to thrive. And if you aren't careful, contentment can escape you.
Yeah, you can just be in that hustle mindset and forget to take a look around.
Right. And the goalpost continues to move. And so there's if you aren't intentional, if you aren't mature in that, contentment doesn't ever arrive.
Yeah.
And if you take the time to discern and understand, hey, when is enough? When is the impact that I want for this business? What is that? What is that in that finish line, that whatever, that everything after that is gravy.
Yeah. And how can I give back? Especially when you start to see that success, what are some ways beyond just, making the dollar bill? Like what can I do to help the people or ministries? How can I serve? And where is God opening doors where I can lead in other ways that are even deeper purpose?
Yeah, I would say, so many of from our business brokerage side of our business, there's a lot of fear there for business owners of like, when I do sell this, then what?
Yeah.
And I think Terry is a great example of that. Of like, man, I want to be Terry when I retire. Yeah, when I grow up, because he's still active in the business world. He's still helping put together deals. He's still guiding and leading people. It's just in a different capacity. But I would argue like the impact is bigger, but that didn't happen by accident. It happened by him building a relationship, outside of just what he does every single day. It became a part of, his philanthropic efforts. And then that he's just met so many people over the years that now the impact he gets to have is, I don't know.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that transition to retirement and kind of doing more of what you want to do. How do you find contentment in that?
Well, a couple of things. One, I don't like the retirement word, Albert.
Sorry.
I think I'm busier now than I was when
when you quote unquote retired.
Yes, than before I quote unquote retired. Exactly. Number two, I think you have to realize. I think I told Tanner this one time when I was early on meeting with you and Stephen and you, Albert, is you have to start figure out where you fit at in the business world. And one of the things I realized over the years is I think where I was best at was in transition times when a lot of activity and things were happening. I always like to say I'm more of a rough weather sailor than I am a calm weather sailor, because sometimes when everything gets calm and there's smooth sailing, I still want to churn the waters a little bit, and or sometimes I can get lazy or whatever. But when you're in those turbulent times, I wake up ready to go to work every day, and in those calm times, I don't. And I think you have to start looking and say, which kind of person am I? I read a Harvard Business Review article about a guy one time that was a CEO of Fortune 500 companies, and he said, they asked him what made a good CEO. He said, I'm a good CEO because obviously my people, and I love what I'm doing from a technical standpoint. But he said, let me put it this way. He said, if you were a train company, if you wanted to invent a new train, I'm your guy. But if you want to make the trains run on time every day, I'd be horrible. And you got to realize which one you are. And a lot of business transitions from one to the other. And when they transition like that, whatever that transition may be, you have to look and say, okay, this is not really who I am anymore. And go find out where you can use your expertise and the passion that God gave you for that type of work in the right areas, and move on. And sometimes you can transition. Some players can play offense, defense, and everything in between. But a lot of us are just a little bit better at one or the other. And we're more passionate about one or the other, and realizing that. And then also realizing as you get to retirement, those gifts God gave you and those lessons and experiences God gave you, if you apply them in the right areas, can be more impactful then than they ever were in the business world. Once I came to Lubbock Christian, I became chairman of the board. Within a few months, the president resigned. And so all of a sudden now I'm in transition. I have to get interim leadership in place. Working alongside the board, but a lot of that responsibility falls to the chair. I have to start a process of getting a new president identified and brought in. And that takes a little bit over a year, and a little bit over a year, by the time that new president shows up, we're in the middle of COVID.
Oh, wow.
and we have to close down the campus.
Well, if they needed a leader for turbulent waters, they had the guy, for that time.
And I'm sitting there and I'm like, why is this happening to me? But then you do a little introspection and said, well, probably for this particular moment, I'm probably
Right where you needed to
right where I need to be, because all these other things I've done, this is where ultimately God has sent me to use the things that he's put in my path for the last 40 years. And so I actually think all of that was preparing me for a lot of what went on there for the 6 years I was chairman, because we went from new presidential surge, COVID, working through the financial stress of that COVID put on universities to coming out now on the other side. And as we got to the other side, because of me realizing I'm really good in those turbulent times, well, we were in a really good spot. And I thought, oh, we're hitting calm waters. Creech needs to find an exit ramp again, so I don't keep stirring water up when water doesn't need to be stirred up anymore. And so, and that's a lot of what led me to saying, it's time for me to move on from being chair. It wasn't because of less of a love for Lubbock Christian, but it was more of a recognition of, I think the time that I was put here has happened, and it's time for other leadership that'll be better prepared to handle what's going on to step into place.
Kellen, I don't know if you've heard this, but I've heard this through this entire story of self-discovery, understanding never stops. Throughout his entire story, he's like taking inventory. Hindsight's 2020, but he's looking back and saying, these things that I felt like were happening to me, all along my journey, were really happening for me and building me into the man that God wanted me to be. The building the skills, the spiritual gifts to make an impact later in life. And I think it's important to. I think of another book, The Gap and the Gain. Really, the point in that book is, as entrepreneurs, as business owners and leaders, if we think about the gap between where we are today and where we want to be, and we dwell on that, we're always discontent. We're always stressed. We're always frustrated of, man, we're just not there yet. But if we take inventory and look back at the gain, look back at where were you and where are you now, and all the things that happen, there's a lot of gratitude, and it's inspiring. When you think back of like, hey, where was I a decade ago, and how has God showed up? How have I showed up to now be the person that I am today, with the skill sets that I have today, with the resources that I have today? And what a blessing. And I think it's important to live in that gain and gratitude, and take inventory of everything that's happened to you. As business owners, it's stinking hard. It is hard right now. But as Terry's pointed out, like so many of the skills that he gathered along the way now show up every day. And for that moment, for that presidential search, COVID, all of those things, like the skills that he developed along the way made him uniquely gifted for that moment that God had for him.
Yeah.
And I think if we're honest, and if we're take the time to listen, I think we can all see that in ourselves.
Yeah, well said. As a guy who's always thinking forward and thinking about the future, this will probably be our last question. I just want to hear what you're excited about for now and moving forward.
I think being excited, I know I'm in my late 60s at this point in time. You think, well, how far down the line do you think? And I'm like, well, God numbered my days before I started, so I guess I'll just keep looking forward until he says the clock ticks zero. And so because of that, another thing my mom told me, says, you're only old is a state of mind. It's not an age. And so she stayed young all of her life. And so I want to stay young, which means you're constantly looking for where God wants you. You know, one of the things I love to do is I love to work with younger, particularly entrepreneurs, and work with them. You know, invest with them, mentor them, answer their questions that come along through the course of life. You know, as far as how to balance work and business. You know, I had a young guy over for lunch earlier this week, and we made hot chicken sandwiches, and we talked about how to balance work and family and business and all of that. And to me, that's one of the things that I love to do the most right now. I think God will impassion you for what you want to do if you'll just keep looking. And so that's one of the things I love to do. You know, I love to come up here and, you know, hang out with Albert and their group. And when I can, I don't make it up here as often as I'd like to, but they just, it reinvigorates me to see people out there trying to find out what they're supposed to be doing and how God wants to be using them. We still stay heavily involved, obviously, in Lubbock Christian, and because I think Lubbock Christian is just doing an amazing job right now on a lot of fronts related to particularly how it serves the West Texas area. And I'm impassioned about serving the West Texas area. West Texas has been good to me, and I think it's important to give back. And then it's important to look broader than that, and that's why, you know, we'll continue with the Kenya work and be impassioned about that. My wife and I have always felt strongly about giving time and energy and resources to the hopeless and the helpless, as we like to say, and because you give them opportunities, and it's amazing what you can see happen through that. So we'll continue to look. We'll continue to work with. And when I say younger folks, I mean obviously that's relative to age, right? So and just see what God provides. But it's a good time of life where you get to do what you want to do and not what you have to do most of the time. So that's a good thing, and we're having a ball and just seeing what God provides. I think the big thing is just I don't always know what the next opportunity is, or I just have to trust that God's going to help me figure out what it is. And it's easier to do that when you're not trying to figure out how to put food on the table for your kids next week.
Okay, you mentioned late 60s. Specifically, how old are you today?
I'm 67.
6'7".
6'7".
Oh,
As
the
my
kids are
grandkids,
saying it.
as my grandkids say, "You're so cool. You're 6'7".
I don't even know what this means, but everybody's saying it.
All right, I've got a new meaning for that I saw online this week. I wanted to leave you with. So Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, verse 7. It talks all about training up your kids and training up the next generation in the word. So
there you go.
Take that.
That's what all the kids are just talking about Deuteronomy.
That's right.
Yeah. How'd we know? We should have figured that out.
It's a very biblical saying they've got.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Well, man, Terry, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. That was great, and you did not disappoint.
Well, I'm happy to be with you guys. Thanks for having me in.
Thank you. All right. If you are a business owner or business leader and you feel stuck in your business, you feel that your business has plateaued and you can't get to the next level, go to our website, stagcoaching.com, and in the upper right-hand corner, click to book your free consultation. And in your free consultation, we'll give you the next few steps to take your business to the next level. It's free, and it's on our website, stagcoaching.com. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.